Hey everyone, this is Kaylee. I am here with a good friend of mine, Jessica. She is a doula here in the St. Petersburg area, and I'm actually going to go ahead and just open up the floor for her to tell you her story. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Kaylee. It's good to be here. So I've been in the women's health field for about 5 years. I am a doula and a childbirth educator, just recently located to the St. Pete area. And I guess kind of what kicked off my journey, looking back, it was very obvious that I was super into women's health. I, instead of doing homework in high school, would go on, I don't know if you remember LiveJournal.
Yes, I do.
Okay. So there's
Back in
this,
the day.
a LiveJournal page called Vagina Pagina, which is Spanish for page, but it's spelled out Vagina Pagina.
Oh.
And I would just spend my evenings reading about cervical fluid and menstruation and contraceptives and all of this stuff. I was always like the go-to girl when my friends needed help about their periods or birth control or all that. And then got to college. I was taking a sociology class, and we saw a little bit of this documentary called The Business of Being Born,
Ooh.
which, it's produced by Ricky Lake and Abby Epstein.
Yep.
It used to be on Netflix, but anyway, my classmates were like, "Oh, you would make a great doula," and I'm like, "You don't even know me."
Yeah.
But it kind
What
of
do you
planted
mean?
the seed, and then I just started looking into like more birth documentaries and kind of fell down the rabbit hole, and I was just super interested. And it wasn't until I actually witnessed my first birth that I was like, wow, this is magical. This is amazing. I had always loved serving women and helping families. And it was just like my women's health passion and my serving people passion came together.
Ah, that's so cool. That's so exciting. It's always nice to hear the story behind your profession, too, because that's what builds us to be who we are, and it builds our character. And I think it's important to kind of talk a little bit about your birth story. Do you have your own birth story, whether traumatic or not? But
thankfully, I have a very positive
Good.
birth story. So Matthew, my little one, my first one, he is a little over a year old.
Okay.
So in the birth field, we kind of have this saying, what gets the baby in, gets the baby out.
Yep.
So I was like 39 weeks and 5 days pregnant, and my husband and I made love on Saturday morning. And that's kind of what, in retrospect, I think kicked things off.
Yeah.
I started having irregular contractions, and looking back, it was very clear that I was in early labor, but when you're in that place yourself, you're kind of in denial, and you're just like, I'm just having these contractions. I guess I'm just having contractions.
This is normal.
Yeah. And that was on a Saturday morning. They started, and then all Saturday, all Sunday, still contracting irregularly. And it wasn't until 8 p.m. on Sunday night that they came, and they were like, active labor, boom, every 5 minutes, I had to like stop and breathe and get through the contractions. My husband wasn't home at the time. He was about 45 minutes away at a dinner. Yeah, he was like doing an interview dinner. But I knew that the dinner was going to be wrapping up soon, and I knew, with the experience that I have, I knew it would probably take a while. There was no need to rush, so I let him finish the dinner. I texted him and said, "Hey, call me when you're done." And so he called me, and I was like, "So I think it's time."
Yep.
So he raced home. I got in the bath to try to slow things down, and it did not slow things down. So I was like, having all these contractions, and he was helping me cope, and I had my essential oils going. I had my playlist on. He had the heating pad on my back. I was like leaning over the bed. But after I got out of the bath, he was like, I think it's time to go to the hospital. And I remember just being in denial. I was like, what?
No.
Are you serious? Like, I thought it was going to be the other way around, where he would be in denial and I would know exactly what was going on. Not when you're in labor.
Yep.
So by that time, I had already notified, I had a doula as well. And I think I called her like around 9 o'clock, and she was like, well, I'm going to catch some Z's and get a few hours rest. We both know that it's probably going to take a while. And when I tell most people that, they're like, are you serious? She wanted to take a nap, but being a doula, I completely understood. Like, okay, she's in it for the long haul. Mm-hmm. So I'll let her.
You got to get your Z's in.
Yeah, thankfully. Exactly. So, anyway, we go to the hospital. I'm having intense contractions all the way. Laboring in the car is always the worst. And then I get to the hospital and then by the time I get checked in, and they checked me, I was, 6 to 7 centimeters dilated, and that was about 1:30 in the morning. Mm-hmm. So I was like, oh, I got this. Yeah. I've already got to 6 to 7, only 3 more to go. Awesome. So my son wasn't born until 8 hours later. Oh, no. Apparently his positioning, he was what they call asynclitic. Uh-huh. So his head wasn't evenly applied to the cervix. So my doula and I had to do a lot of positioning to try to get him to move and settle into the right spot so that when my waters broke, they would be sure that he was evenly applied to the cervix. So, I got in the tub at the hospital, walked around labor and delivery, birth ball, all the positions, still had my playlist going, had the lights dimmed. My husband was amazing. He, the husband doula team is perfect because you have your husband who you love and you made this baby with and you're going to raise this baby with, and he, smells like your man and he smells so good. And then you have your doula behind you. She was a massage therapist, so she had a TENS unit. She had her bag of tricks, essential oils, her hands. My husband's the strong silent type, so she had all of the words of encouragement, and he just held down the fort. Yeah. And so long night of laboring and about an hour of pushing, and Matthew was born. Yay. And it was the most empowering and beautiful and transformative experience that I've ever had. And I was so glad to be able to have had a low-risk pregnancy in pretty textbook labor and delivery, and also really great postpartum recovery.
Awesome. That's amazing. I think it's important what you said about having the team. So you got to have a team. You can't just have the one person in there. You're not going to have all of your needs met because just like you said, your husband has certain qualities, but the doula has other qualities, midwife, whatever it might be. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. My next question is going to be then, so that's your birth story, which is amazing, and I'm sure it's just really empowering and amazing to share with all of your clients and the people that you work with. And what is your favorite birth story from your people that you've experienced or been a part of?
So I feel like every birth that you attend as a doula is super special and unique. Mm-hmm. But one that really comes to mind is that I had, when I was first starting out, one of my childhood friends that I had known since 4th grade, I was her doula. And her husband was in the military and he was deployed for her delivery. And so she made sure she had a doula, she had a birth photographer. Her first she had at the hospital, and this time around she wanted to do it at a birth center. And she rocked it. She had waited for this phone call from her husband. She was starting to contract a little bit. But later on, it was obvious to me and the midwife that she didn't let herself go into labor until talking to her husband. We have these incredible pictures, and because I was her only support person, we shared these really intimate moments, because when you're in labor, not just because you're exposed physically, but you're in a very emotionally vulnerable place, and it was just really beautiful getting to just hold her in my arms during her contractions and reassure her, and just having that bond with her, having had it since we were kids.
Yeah.
That was a beautiful experience. And little Adler was born, and she's a petite girl, and he was like over 9 pounds. Woo. And she had him at the birth center outside of the hospital. Actually, it was at Breath of Life here in Largo. And it was just one of the... I didn't know that it could get so deep on a doula level.
Yeah.
But to have that emotional connection with someone was really special.
That's one thing that I've noticed too, being a pelvic PT, we get into that interpersonal area and we do so much relationship building, but I've noticed that with my doulas and midwives as well, and I think that that's a huge thing for moms and people going into labor because one, a little freaked out, I'm sure, at that point. I haven't had children yet, but I know I'm going to freak out.
Yes.
So I know it's going to happen.
It's intense.
That's why this podcast is happening. No, I'm kidding. So what do you think that everyone needs to know to prepare for birth? Like, what is your, one thing that you wish everyone knew to prepare?
So I feel like fear is such a huge stumbling block for labor. I feel like our bodies, for the most part, 9 times out of 10, know what to do. But our minds can get in the way. And unfortunately, in the media, we have all these depictions of birth of that, oh, my water broke. And it's 10 out of 10 pain. You have to rush to the hospital. The baby's going to fall out if my water breaks, and just all the trauma stories that are out there, which unfortunately, is part of our culture because I feel like we have lost so much of this birth knowledge that we used to have when we lived with our extended families and, our grandmothers and aunts and been around so many people who have had babies. We've kind of lost touch with what is normal, what is supposed to happen. And so one thing that I work with my clients, it's really mind over matter. So knowing that there's pain involved, but the pain is purposeful. It is anticipated. It's coming. It's intermittent. You're not going to have just 12 hours of searing pain and then your baby's born. No, your contractions, your uterus gives you a break to rest in between. There's different ways to cope with the contractions. And it's normal. Your baby has become attached to you for 40 weeks. And then you have to expel this 7-pound little person out of your body. And that process takes time. The cervix undergoes so much change. So I think knowing what to expect is half or more than half of the battle. And I think, women and their families, they're just ill-equipped and ill-prepared. They try, I think, to find in research, but I feel like having a guide walk you through the entire process so that your individual questions can be answered
because everyone's key. Different, too. And I know my patients, it's overwhelming to see all of the stuff on Google. If you type in giving birth or labor, you're going to freak out.
You probably shouldn't.
Just don't do that. I think that's important, though. You have to know that it's mind over matter. And I've had a couple people in our podcast actually have mentioned that so much of giving birth is mental. And I think that's huge. That's fire right there. That's intense. That's a good thing to say. So what about then preparing for birth? Awesome. We go through the mind over matter. I know that you talk about that before you get to the actual place of birth, hospital, wherever it might be. What should someone bring in their bag? What do you think or recommend your women bring?
So I mentioned this during my labor, but setting the environment for your labor, regardless of the place where you deliver, is key. I like to tell my clients that you wouldn't have sex just anywhere, right? You want to feel safe and and so I say that because sex and labor are, as you can imagine, a little bit related.
Right.
You have the sex and you get the baby. But it's also an equally intimate and vulnerable experience. And so I say, let's set the mood for labor.
Okay.
So
let's switch that.